Hello, students of history. My name is Gary Foster. I'm a retired Navy captain. On behalf of the High Ground, I'd like to welcome you to this series on World War I. It's a two-part series. Part one, we'll talk about the war and how it started. Part two, we'll talk about Wisconsin natives and Wisconsin troops during the war. I was a naval flight officer for almost 30 years in the United States Navy. I flew on board two aircraft types, the EC-130Q and the E-6A and B versions. We're a nuclear command and control platform, so if the president needed to launch nuclear weapons, then he would send messages to our aircraft and we would relay them to the nuclear forces, which included the ballistic missile submarines, the ballistic missile silos, and also the bombers. I'm honored to be chosen to present you with this brief here by the High Ground because I wrote this book called Notes from the Trenches, and it's about my grandfather who served in World War I. He was a bugler with the 32nd Division, and he hailed from La Crosse, Wisconsin, and he served over there in France in the trenches, and so he wrote a lot of letters back to his family, and I took those letters and I put them in chronological order and wrote a book about him and his time over there. So if you're interested, it's available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Again, Notes from the Trenches, a musician's journey through World War I. All right, so we're going to continue on here with part one and how the war began. Part one of World War I. This is the Great War, it was called. It wasn't known as the First World War until World War II, but it was also called the War to End All Wars. Most of the World War I battles were named after the rivers and the regions they were fought in, and for example, the Battle of the Somme, the MARNE, the Oise, and the MEUSE, Argonne. Other battles were named after cities or regions such as Cantigny and the Alsace-Lorraine. As you can see, the battles for France were fought mainly in the north and northeast, where the German army had invaded with the employment of the SCHLEIFFEN plan, which will be discussed a few slides from this one. So this was Europe in 1914. The Triple Entente at the time included France, Great Britain, and her territories, and Russia. The map also shows the countries that joined after 1914, such as Italy and Romania in 1915, and Greece in 1917. The Central Powers included Germany, Austria-Hungary, Turkey, and Bulgaria, which joined in 1915. While trouble had been brewing for a while, it all really began with World War I in Serbia. The Central Powers were attempting to annex Serbia, which was more aligned with the Triple Entente at that time. Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the heir to the Austrian throne, and he was in Bosnia attempting to negotiate a deal to bring Serbia into the Central Powers. He and his wife were killed by a Serbian nationalist, and this ignited the Central Powers to take military action against Serbia. Serbia allied with Russia, prompting Germany to declare war on Russia. Germany declared war on France and invaded Belgium, a neutral country that put up no resistance as the German army advanced through the country. Great Britain issued an ultimatum to Germany to withdraw from Belgium, which was rejected by the German leadership. That prompted Great Britain and its vast array of territories to declare war on Germany. The United States, under the leadership of President Woodrow Wilson, decided to remain unengaged and neutral. The great German General Schlieffen developed a plan in 1905 to invade France by plowing through Belgium. The plan was to overwhelm the French before they knew what hit them and capture Paris. The first major battle of the war began on September 5th and lasted through September 12, 1914, known as the First Battle of the Marne. On the Western Front, Paris was saved as the French and British troops disrupted the Schlieffen plan by launching a major counteroffensive against the invading German armies to the east of Paris. What's notable about this battle is that 600 taxicabs from the city helped to move French troops to the front, and they were aided by French aerial reconnaissance, which revealed a gap had developed in the center of the whole German advance. The French and the British exploited this weakness, and they pressed their advantage. The Germans then began a strategic withdrawal northward as the Allies pursued. Each side repeatedly tried to outmaneuver the other and gain a tactical advantage as they moved northward to what became known as the Race to the Sea. The First Battle of YPRES in Belgium saw the British army lose nearly half of their regular army, and the German army was decimated by the loss of thousands of men in their late teens in what they called the Massacre of the Innocents. Trench warfare became the way to conduct warfare during World War I for the next 4 years. The middle picture shows almost zero movement between 1914 and 1917, where small parcels of land were captured, recaptured, and then given up time and again. The land in between the trenches became known as no man's land, since no army apparently could hold it for very long. The orange pictured in that picture above shows that from 1914 to 1918 there was a stalemate. The lack of any serious capture of land up until March of 1918 shows a complete stalemate. The Christmas truce of 1914 was a very odd event. It occurred between the German and British soldiers in the trenches of northern France. All the shooting stopped and the soldiers exited their trenches, they exchanged gifts, they sang carols, and they engaged in a soccer game. This was the only Christmas truce of the war, as Allied commanders subsequently forbid fraternization with orders to shoot any violators. If you want a better visual presentation, go to YouTube and use that address at the bottom of the screen, and you'll see a great presentation. It was actually a commercial for, I believe, chocolate. German ingenuity made submarines the most menacing weapon of war to date. The Germans knew that by sinking commercial shipping inbound to Great Britain that they could essentially starve the British from necessities such as fuel, metal supplies, ammunition, foodstuff, and other essentials. One of the worst weapons of the war, in fact an ugly side of the war, was poison gas that was introduced during World War I. The gas would envelop unsuspecting troops, causing them to retreat or stand to become easy targets for German infantry and marksmen. The resulting gas mask industry was booming after the first uses of poison gas. On May 7, 1915, a German U-boat torpedoed the British passenger liner Lusitania off the Irish coast. It sank in 18 minutes and it drowned 1,201 people, including 128 Americans. President Woodrow Wilson subsequently sent 4 diplomatic protests to Germany. I'm quickly going to introduce you to some of the new weapons of war that were used during the World War I. German Zeppelins were used to bomb London and other major population cities in Britain. The Germans invented the much faster and more maneuverable monoplane that could outfly French or British biplanes. The poison gas or mustard gas, as we previously talked about, would burn in your lungs and your eyes and make you easy targets. Submarines took a toll on shipping, even off the coast of the United States. The machine gun came to prominence during the war. It could kill or wound numerous troops advancing toward defensive positions. The flamethrower was also extremely deadly and produced the most horrible means of death by burning soldiers alive. Artillery was more advanced as well, as some shells could travel 40 to 50 miles. This became effective for the Germans as they could shell Paris from their captured territory north of the city. Tanks were introduced and caused great havoc at the outset. They essentially replaced horse-drawn cannons and infantry. Possibly 1.2 million people died during this 11-month engagement in 1916 called the Battle of Verdun from February 21st to December 18th. French casualties 377,000 plus, German casualties 337,000 plus. Some estimates put at 1.2 million, including civilians. On July 1st, 1916, the British Army suffered the worst single-day death toll in its history as 18,800 soldiers were killed on the first day of the Battle of the Somme, which lasted from July 1st to November 18th, 1916. September saw the first use of tanks. The notorious Adolf Hitler, a corporal in the German infantry at this time, was wounded in this battle. Meanwhile, in the United States, Americans were happy that President Wilson had kept them out of the war, and they re-elected him to a second term. Wilson tried to organize a peace conference to end the war. A telegram which became famous, known as the Zimmerman telegram, gave Americans great pause as Germany attempted to ally with Mexico against the United States. German leadership, smelling the demise of the British Isles, resumed unrestricted submarine warfare to strangle inbound commerce to the island. The sinking of more U.S. ships prompted President Wilson to take action. In March and April of 1917, unrestricted warfare took a toll on U.S. ships sailing over to give supplies to Great Britain. So President Wilson appeared before Congress on April 2, 1917, and addressed the U.S. Congress and gave a speech saying that the world must be made safe for democracy. And they asked the Congress for a declaration of war against Germany. And then on April 6th, the United States of America declared war on Germany. The U.S. Army only had about 145,000 men at the beginning of the war, but on May 18th, the Selective Service Act was passed by the U.S. Congress authorizing a draft. It would grow to 4 million men by the end of the draft, and it was revised in September 1918 to include men between the ages of 18 and 45. The war took its toll on France. There was a great mutiny, but many of their soldiers were executed for mutiny. French and British engineers placed 600 tons of explosives under the Messines Bridge, ridge south of Ypres after digging a tunnel for over a year. The detonation eliminated 10,000 German troops instantly. The bombing of London saw its worst day on June 13th, 1917. You may have heard of Snoopy and the Red Baron. Well, there was a real Red Baron who flew for the German Air Force. The Red Baron was actually a very highly decorated German pilot whose name was Manfred von Richthofen. He was shot down and killed by the British, however, on April 21st, 1918. The German ace was credited with shooting down 80 Allied aircraft. He was buried with military honors by the British. Up until May 28th of 1918, American troops were under the command of French or British officers. General Pershing of the United States commanded the first ever all-American assault on the city of Cantigny. The Battle of Belleau Wood involved the U.S. Marine Corps. Battlefield casualties amounted to 5,000, the deadliest engagement to date for U.S. troops. We will discuss the 32nd Division more in detail in part 2 of this briefing. But the 32nd Division was engaged in no less than 5 campaigns, the final one being the occupation of Germany. The map on the right shows the progress made by the addition of American forces to the war effort. By the end of the war, the Germans had been removed almost completely from France, which is shown by the solid red line. The 100-day offensive was a costly endeavor, but succeeded in bringing the Germans to the surrender table. This was the deadliest battle in U.S. history, known as the MEUSE Argonne Offensive from September 26 to 1918 to November 11, 1918, a total of 47 days. It was the largest in the United States military history, which involved 1.2 million American soldiers. The battle cost 28,000 German lives, 26,277 American lives, and an unknown number of French lives. It was the largest and bloodiest operation of World War I for the American Expeditionary Force, or the AEF, which it was known, which was commanded by General John J. Pershing, and the deadliest battle in American history. On the very last day of the war, at 10:40 a.m., 20 minutes prior to the American armistice going into effect, the 32nd Division chaplain, First Lieutenant William Davitt, from the 125th Infantry, was killed. It was said he was moving from soldier to soldier, reassuring them that the war was about to end, giving prayers and encouragement. A sniper bullet tragically ended his life. Very similar to the COVID-19 pandemic that we are experiencing today, the Spanish flu pandemic of 1917 to 1919 infected an estimated 500 million people worldwide and killed somewhere between 20 million and 50 million people. Over 60,000 U.S. troops died from causes other than battle, which included the Spanish flu. All total, over 65 million troops participated in the war on both sides. 8.5 million were killed, 21.2 million were wounded, 7.75 million were taken prisoner or were missing, and 37.5 million total casualties occurred. This is the end of part 1.